Right. Well, hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to connect today. I'm really fortunate to welcome Alicia here to the virtual podium, who will be hosting our session for the day. So, Alicia, I'll hand it over to you, and I will let folks in as they trickle in the waiting room. So, take it away. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pierre, and thank you all for being here. So this is our topic for today is implementation strategies. Um, and before I fully start, I want to share a land and water acknowledgement. And first, just like this picture is from the book Autumn Peltier, Water Warrior, which speaks a lot about water rights and our responsibilities for taking care of water as well as land. I'm calling in today from Ottawa, which is located on the traditional unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. The Algonquin people have inhabited and cared for these lands and water since time immemorial. I want to express gratitude and respect to them for the land and all it has provided and will continue to provide. And as Child Bright spans from coast to coast to coast, I also want to recognize and honor the ancestral and unceded territories and diverse and rich ways of knowing and being of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations. Also, just flagging here that this weekend is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and there are likely events and educational pieces in your city. So I encourage you to see what's going on. So me, I am Alicia Hilderly. I am a postdoc with the Child Bright Phase 2 Implementation Science Project, which I'll share a bit about today, but also share a bit about another project that uses implementation strategies. So the plan for today, as in previous sessions, I'll share how I got here to implementation science. Then obviously the topic is why are we talking about implementation strategies? I'll share a bit about ERIC, which is a compilation of strategies, and then share examples from two different projects. So if you've attended previous sessions in this series, you'll recognize this kind of slide where we share where we came from, how we are where we are today. So when I was an undergrad, I realized that I really liked coaching adapted sports. I loved being around kids and people in different physical settings. But I also was really fascinated by the brain, and I loved big chunks of data and information to analyze. Um, so I kind of put all that together and realized that a good match for me would be doing clinical trials in pediatric rehabilitation. So I did a PhD and then started a postdoc actually on a phase 1 Child Bright project. And I had this underlying goal of changing clinical practice, finding those gaps and improving what was happening. Along that path, I became a patient myself and a participant in a clinical trial. And when the clinical trial ended, I heard my own words that I said as a researcher repeated back to me. I asked the researchers, what do I do now? How do I keep accessing this treatment? And they said, well, it's not clinically available yet. It's still experimental. So, go back to standard care and, we'll let you know if it changes. Go to your appointments. And it always felt empty to share that with families that what we were doing, the study wasn't available to them to keep doing. But hearing it as a patient and participants felt so much more empty. And I committed myself in that moment, that experience, to shift my research to really focus on actually changing clinical practice by taking what we learn in clinical trials and moving it into clinical practice through implementation. So this all happened before phase 2 of Child Bright began, which had implementation focus. But I hunted down this course, the Alberta SPORE Support Unit. It's an implementation science and patient-oriented research certificate, and it was wonderful. I took that as my first exposure to implementation science. And then when Child Bright Phase 2 came out, it seemed like a great and natural match for me to keep advancing my implementation science skills. And this picture here is of myself, a master's student, 2 OTs, a clinical practice lead, and a family partner who are all part of our Phase 2 Child Bright project. And now, as it says here, my focus really is taking clinical trials across the bridge to implementation. We've been sharing this slide as well, so the hats that we wear. So my primary role is a postdoctoral associate at the University of Calgary. I'm also a family engagement and research instructor with the Family Engagement Research Program through CanChild at McMaster University. And I also facilitate patient and family engagement with Rare Kids Can, which is a pediatric rare disease clinical trials network. In terms of who I am outside of my roles as a employee, also a mom, a wife, a daughter, still a patient, a friend, and a teammate because I still like playing sports myself. So that's enough about me. I now want to get a sense of everyone's here. How familiar are you entering this webinar about implementation strategies? So Pierre's going to put a poll up. See if we get a few more replies.
We'll give it a few more seconds.
Yeah.
All right, I think that we have most folks, and so I will share the results.
Thanks, Pierre. So I think I don't consider myself an expert. I'm here to share what I know. So I think I fall in the experienced category. Hopefully we can all learn together to kind of move in that direction. So in case you weren't at previous webinars, I'm going to share a bit about them because they tell the story of getting to strategies. So the very first webinar in this series was a reintroduction to implementation science, where Celia and Simone talked about theories, models, and frameworks, and how that's a starting point for your implementation research. And I know here that it can be confusing to know what to choose, but you can look at similar studies, learn and borrow, and find a way to adapt this, base of how you're going to design your research from others. I also like this last point in case you're feeling overwhelmed by theories, models, and frameworks, that you may only need to know one or two. And I came into implementation science from a clinical trial background. Like I said, I had never done qualitative work or really heard the words theories, models, and frameworks. And so this was daunting to me, but doesn't need to be, is what this webinar was trying to share. Flagging that the recording of this webinar is available, as well as the recording for the subsequent next webinar, which was about barriers and facilitators. So this is something that is really important to understand to be able to think about implementation strategies. So barriers and facilitators are things that either facilitate, help implementation of whatever you want to implement, a program, intervention, whatever it is. And barriers are things that are stopping implementation from being successful. And it's important to learn about the barriers and facilitators in the setting that you want to implement something. There's many ways to learn about them, as it says here. It could be informal, like conversations. You could do it more formally, like a literature review, use surveys or focus groups. There's no right or wrong way. It's based on your capacity, how large the project is, different pieces like that. Two different frameworks were presented in that webinar. The theoretical domains framework, which I won't get into too much today. It's about individual level change. And then also the CFRT, the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research, which is pictured here and shows more multi-level change. So innovation, individuals, inner setting, outer setting, and the process of implementation are all considered. And that's what we're going to really think about today. So I'll get into a little bit more as we keep going. Again, the recording for this is available. So a definition of implementation strategies that I quite like comes from this paper titled Implementation Science Made Too Simple, a Teaching Tool, but it's a way of breaking down what all of these words mean. So in this, the thing that you're implementing, the intervention, practice, innovation, it's what you want to get into wherever you want it to be. Strategies are the things that we do to help people or places do the thing. So breaking this down a little bit, that it's however we can help implementation happen. We often think of education as an example, making sure people know that it's important to implement, giving them tools to do that. But I'm curious if you can pop into the chat some other examples or things that you think could help with implementation. So different strategies. Just a little brainstorm to see what comes to mind. Anything. No one wants to share. If no one wants to share, I'll keep going through and can share ones that I have planned to share, but I'm just curious what other people were familiar with or had thought of. Okay, I'll keep rolling. Can tell that we're not quite at the point to share examples. So, ERIC. This acronym comes up a lot when talking about strategies. Just screenshotted the article here in case you're curious about looking at it. But what ERIC is, it's a compilation of 73 different strategies. These are, well, there's 73 of them. They give you a strategy and definition, and these are all based on expert recommendations of what strategies could be useful to use. I think these are a great thing to read through to kind of get yourself thinking about the breadth of possibilities for strategies. Even the ones here, access new funding. It's not all about education, which is often where our mind goes. It's, different things work in different settings. And one of the ones here that I like to flag is the Ulta patient and consumer fees isn't always applicable in a Canadian healthcare setting. In private healthcare options, yes, but it just flags that the context of the strategy really matters to which one you would choose. There's 73 though. That's a lot. That's a lot of strategies to figure out and to decide what to do with. So these authors, a subgroup of them, decided to group the 73 strategies into categories. So kind of, they use concept mapping, but idea of theming them together into which ones were similar. And I find this is a bit more intuitive to look at, to go through and think about, okay, which of these groups maybe make more sense for me to look at, and take a step back. So if 73 seems too many, here is 9, where you can flag a bigger category and then look within that what maybe is applicable to what you need. So I mentioned that we would be talking about CFIR. And why we're talking about CFIR is that there is a matching tool between CFIR and ERIC. So the piece of this is that you want the strategies that you're choosing, like we said, to either leverage facilitators or address barriers. So you need to know what your barriers and facilitators are. So your first step is figuring that out. CFIR is one of the ways that you can do that. Using the tool that was developed, there's actually a process where it gives you a list of potential strategies that may be effective at addressing barriers and facilitators from CFIR. I do want to flag that this tool is a guide. It's not prescriptive, but it helps to narrow down that long list of 73 into maybe some better options. So I will show you how the tool works. A couple other flags that I have about this tool, though, is that the CFIR ERIC tool was based on the original CFIR from 2009. There's now an updated one from 2022. They have created a matching table for this new updated CFIR and ERIC. That doesn't have the same functionality, but it can give you an idea of what might match. Details on it are on the CFIR website, which I've just listed here. I'm going to go to the Excel sheet to show you how it works. Before I do, 2 other things to point out. Anything in green means that it was endorsed by over half of the experts who were involved in the compilation of ERIC strategies. Level 2, the yellow, were endorsed by 20 to 49. So less experts thought that was a good strategy to address that barrier or that facilitator. So it's like a bit of a nifty tool. It was, it'll be nice. I think there's plans to create the same macro sheet for the updated CFIR, which will be great. So This is what it looks like when you open it. So the C4ERIC Barrier Buster tool. It gives you the citations. It gives you some instructions about how to use this. The summary tab shows you all 73 ERIC strategies here in column A. And then across the top in row 1 are all of the C4 constructs. Constructs really are just the barriers of facilitators. I get caught, the language is intimidating to me a lot of the time with implementation science, and I start using it, but I want to catch myself in that really it's just the things in C4. So then when you look down here, so in trying to choose a strategy that matches the intervention source. So say the intervention source is a barrier. It doesn't come from a reputable source. It comes from, not a peer-reviewed source. No one's really sure if that intervention is good. Ways to address that, implementation strategies. This shows all the different options and the ones that were endorsed by experts. So none of them are very high, but like, for example, 27% for one of them is obtain and use patients' feedback to help improve that barrier. This goes through for all of them. This is just this static table. What's cool about this tool is that you can kind of put it into action. So on the C4 tab, these are all of the C4 constructs and then the definition of the barrier. So it frames them all as barriers. You can reframe them as facilitators. This would still work, but it's just worded that way. So I've gone down and chosen 2 ones just for fun. So peer pressure I chose it by selecting 1. And then I chose compatibility. So these 2 as being 2 barriers that, sure, these could be the barriers for my project that I found in my previous step. When I scroll to the very end, there is a button that says query. You press that, and then you get an output. So this is where the magic happens, you could say. What it's done is it's looked to see, it's compiled all of the strategies that link to peer pressure, the ones that link to compatibility, so the 2 barriers that I chose. And it gives you also, if you add those together, is there a strategy that can address both? And so here there's a few options that are level 1, being endorsed by at least half of the experts. So maybe one of these are good for you to focus your efforts on and decide if it's good to move forward with. You can put as many barriers as you want in this and see what comes out and play around with it. But really what I find this is a nice starting point because looking at a list of 73 and trying to decide what matches is difficult. So that's how I put this tool as a helpful one. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my slides. And again, just flagging the C4 website, c4guide.org has all of this on it for you. Okay, so we've talked about the matching of strategies to barriers and facilitators. A logic model is a great way to think about how it actually works. So the mechanism piece here, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I encourage you to think about a logic model. So your barriers and facilitators are the determinants, another word, in this column here, things that either help or stop implementation. The strategies are how you're going to address those. So it even says here, either you're leveraging facilitators or you're kind of mitigating, overcoming barriers. The mechanisms are how you think it's actually going to work. And this is where I often can figure out which strategy makes the most sense because I can walk through, okay, if I use this strategy, what is that actually going to do? And how is it going to help me? And then what do I think is going to happen after? The implementation research logic model, there's a paper about it. There's some examples that if you wanted to look into this more, there are appendices in that paper. But it's just nice to map this out for yourself and think, how is it going to work? Something else that I think is helpful, I'm using an example we all think of, educational materials. This is the strategy and the definition from ERIC. When I first was exposed to ERIC and read this, my first reaction was like, well, what do? I don't know how to make this into something. This is a very broad and honestly very vague description of a strategy. Like, educational materials, is that a manual? Do I make a pamphlet? How? And there are so many missing pieces to this, but that's on purpose because Eric is your starting point that you then create into an actual strategy and operationalize. There are guidelines for how to turn this into something that you can actually do. And these are the pieces that are recommended to define to make your strategy reproducible. That's always the goal in reporting, right? But it's also so that you know what you did, and you can map it out very clearly. So this is an adaptation figure. I quite like it, from a paper that talks about how to specify and report strategies with the hope of increased transparency, having reproducibility versus in a paper or other people just saying, oh, we developed educational materials. And they kind of go, well, like how? Who got them? Who made them? How often do they review them? All of these pieces are important to define. Okay. Before I get into examples, I just want to check that I haven't confused you more, and put this poll up to see if perhaps things are getting clearer or not. Okay, phew. It looks like we're trending in the right direction, which I appreciate. All right. Okay. Oh, it looks like almost everyone is on the understand and a couple getting there. So I'm hoping I'm going to share two different studies. I'm hoping this adds more clarity, to what it is and how they work. So the first study that I'm going to share is, my team's Child Bright Phase 2 study called Interplay. Flagging here that we have an incredibly engaged team. What I'm showing is our combined work. It is not my work. It is not one person's work. I want them all to get their due credit. This is across 3 institutions. So it's been quite fabulous to work on. So first, why did we do this study? As a team, we came together in the early days of knowing we would have funding for an implementation project, and recognized that early hand therapy, so before the age of 2, is effective for infants and toddlers who may have unilateral cerebral palsy. This little boy is doing constraint-induced movement therapy, so his stronger hand is being wrapped up in this tensor bandage that his more affected hand is using the xylophone. While we know this therapy is effective, it is not well implemented across Canada. When we first looked, it was our 3 sites and a couple others that were offering it, but you would have to be close to one of these major hospitals, lucky enough to find an occupational therapist who could actually deliver it. So this was our kind of a choice that we decided would be great to focus our efforts on for an implementation science project. For our study design, we had 4 sequential phases. So first, we use a survey to identify national barriers and facilitators to early intensive hand therapy. The results of this are published. A master's student, Divya Varabendi, led that project. In phase 2, we used the mapping, the CFER-ERIC mapping, to take the survey results of barriers and facilitators and map it to implementation strategies. I'll give you more detail on that. We then used interviews to understand more about strategies and barriers and facilitators. And finally, in phase 4, we used a co-design session to refine and prioritize our strategies. Our protocol is also published. If you're curious for more details on that, it's the first citation here. So, like I said, we took the CFER barriers and facilitators from our survey. We mapped them to ERIC. So there were 31 CFER barriers and facilitators that mapped to 49 strategies. So we really didn't narrow down our list by any means. We had a huge list. And we decided that this would be our starting point. So as it shows here, for each of the barriers and facilitators, the CFER constructs, we had our multidisciplinary research team use a survey to endorse which one they thought would be best for our team to focus on. They could choose one or more. We ended up settling on 21. So we narrowed it from 49 to 21 using this kind of voting process. For all of these was always, I don't know what to do. You could ask me and we would chat more if that was something that helped with the research team narrowing this down. How we asked them to narrow it down was to think about appease. So for all strategies, ideally, you could have all the funding in the world and all the strategies in the world and make everything be implemented, but that's not reality. So we asked our team to think about these 6 things while they were deciding which strategies to endorse for us to use. It's great having discussions with our team too, because they're so engaged, and something that everyone got stuck on when we were talking about this was, who is the doer, who is implementing these strategies? So we ended up defining a little bit more, who are we? So we have to choose a strategy that we, our research team, can work on. So within our abilities, we gave ourselves a year to work on these strategies, and we had about $40,000 that we'd reserved for the strategies. So it gave us these kind of constraints to help shape which strategies from that huge list would actually be, feasible for us to do. So we then, like I said, we took the mapping from our research team. We brought the 21 strategies that we mapped to interviewees. So 3 groups of participants. We had parents of young children with cerebral palsy who would be eligible for this intervention. We had occupational therapists who could deliver this intervention. And we also interviewed leadership of occupational therapy programs who would be in charge of deciding if this would get implemented. Flagging here that what we did in this table was I grouped all of the ERIC strategies based on the categories. So while I got to do the 9 categories, I just kind of made it easier for us to see which category was really where all our efforts going. But what you can see from the table is that the things that we mapped weren't always the strategies that our interviewees brought up. So just flagging another level of this is that this C for ERIC matching is perhaps a starting point for that conversation to decide which strategies are the best. So we analyzed the interview data. We then held a co-design workshop with participants from each of these 3 groups, and we came up with a list of priority strategies. So the ones that we decided were most important for supporting implementation of early hand therapy for young kids with CP were these 11. We have very detailed definitions of these as well, but I'm just showing you them to see kind of how this got refined down to a list of 11 from that 49 that we initially had as a proposition. So I'm going to give examples of a few of these so you can see kind of what they are and not just a few words. So the first one, developing a roadmap to therapy. So what these became in this strategy are infographics, 1-pagers with embedded links for more information that takes an occupational therapist from finding a baby and getting them therapy, and also takes a parent from maybe my baby needs therapy to getting therapy. We made these generic so they can fit across national settings, and they're also going to be modifiable. So if a team comes to us and says, hey, can you add this, this, this for our setting, we can do that. What the goal, the hope for this type of roadmap was that it could reduce wait times for families. So there are different holdups that happen that we talked about a lot with and throughout our study. One being that people wait for a diagnosis of CP. You don't need that to start therapy, and certain assessments are also not needed. But in some settings, people push those forward. So these roadmaps flag those, don't wait, go. These are going to be distributed on our website and through other avenues, which I'll share in just a second. So next, raising awareness was there. Everyone thought it was really important to have information centralized across multiple platforms, and through discussions, Instagram became the way to do this. Parents are on it. Parents are always asking for online sources. So Peyton Shaw, who is our exceptional Child Bride Summer student this year, has been building our Instagram account with information and videos of real kids. So much stuff on it. I encourage you to follow it. And that became a big piece. They also suggested holding regular webinars so we could catch the attention of more clinicians. And to form an OT directory, which I'll talk about in a couple strategies forward. I'll flag right now too that strategies often work together or overlap a little bit. And that's something that maybe you'll see as I go through these. You're like, oh, that was somewhere else. Yeah, they kind of support each other in different puzzle pieces. So number 3 on our list was to create a therapy guide. Throughout all of our efforts, we do not want to recreate the wheel. So first, we're going to see what exists. Bloorview has an excellent constraint handbook, and University of Calgary has a manual that includes bimanual pieces in this as well. We're working on right now on merging them to create a guide that meets the needs of this strategy. It will also be available in all the places that they are now, plus we'll be sharing it more widely. But I think that's a lesson that I had from this was you don't have to start fresh. There's lots of resources that exist. And then one more example here, our 4th strategy was to support occupational therapists. So this also overlapped with the Raising Awareness one, where a directory of OTs was there as well. So these, what we've created is across Canada, we're missing the territories in one province right now, a list of OTs who are experienced with early hand therapy and have consented to being contacted by other people interested in learning about it. And then beginning this fall, we're going to have monthly drop-ins hosted by those mentors. And we're also going to do a session to teach them more about coaching early hand therapy to parents. So there's different things that happen within this overall one, but this is how it's breaking out to look like in real life. Our research team meets every few months to decide what to do next on our list. But what we also do, just an example here, is look to see what already exists. So number 9 is offer peer support. One of our research teams already has a peer support program. So we probably kind of template this and create the strategy through that. So looking to see how we can leverage what we have and sharing what we have more broadly. So that links to my next slide just about tailoring. That this study is a pre-implementation study. We aren't actually examining our strategies. We're trying to get them out there in the best way possible and encouraging families, therapists, sites to use what suits their context. They may have to modify. I mentioned that like our roadmap can be modified if they need to. So can everything else really. Our hope is that they'll come to us, we can change it for them, help it to fit their setting to support implementation. I keep thinking this is a toolbox. So I think there's a toolbox of strategies. We figured out 11 that could work. What do you want to pick from it? That being said, the 11 that we have, we already know that they may not be good matches for Indigenous families. So we've also launched a sub-study that is fully focused on understanding the Indigenous experience of early hand therapy. This is underway, and for this, we'll likely have strategies for each community that are different. But just flagging that it's important to think about your context, and we did. We realized that what we were doing was national, but it wasn't considering community needs and preferences. So this is why we're doing this separate sub-study called River, which we have a whole team of parents and new people in too. So a lot of great leaders in it. Okay, that was our interplay pre-implementation study. I'm going to give you one more example from another study that is completed. And maybe this will give you just a couple more. They are similar in that they both are focused on early hand therapy for young kids with CP. So like content the same. Heighten actually happened before Interplay started, focused on 2 sites in Alberta. So kind of explain to you how we chose our strategies and how those ended up working out. So we started with a Calgary-based research team, multidisciplinary. We had parents engaged. While we were designing this study, the implementation of early hand therapy shifted from our hospital to community rehab. In our hospital, we had an experienced team. Community rehab had never implemented hand therapy. So this has changed everything for us. We immediately recruited an OT clinical lead from that community rehab site to join our team and to help us learn about how rehab worked in their setting. We then also expanded our settings to Glen Rose Rehab Hospital in Edmonton, where they were experienced as well in early hand therapy, but experiencing implementation challenges. So we had 2 settings to focus on. So rather than doing a more formal way of assessing barriers and facilitators, we talked about it. We all met and talked about, okay, using the Ottawa model of research use, this is our model that we used for this study, what needs to change, what needs to be supported, how can we make this work at the 2 settings? So we flagged different things here. I've just written them, you don't have to know them, but things that needed to be addressed, things that we wanted to create solutions for. In doing this, we ended up really changing the protocol of the intervention. So this can happen. We don't have to focus on the study design, but we did end up starting to run a hybrid trial. We looked at effectiveness of our modified intervention as well as implementation. I'm just flagging that because it was a piece that came up as we were looking at strategies. Some of them really were to really change what the intervention was. Once we'd gotten to this point, we looked at our strategies. So we had 3 main categories of strategies: caregiver education, clinician education, and then dedicated clinical time. The education took different formats. So for caregivers, before they even started therapy, we did a 30-minute webinar. It was recorded, they could watch on their own time, but it walked them through, what is this therapy? Why is it important to do? It talked about babies' cues, like how they show that they're not interested, how they show they are interested, pieces that they needed to know before they started, but that would hopefully really engage them in this therapy. We gave them a program manual so they could walk them through, they could see what was coming, why we did certain things we did, and also a website that they could look through. For the clinicians, we realized they needed more training on coaching. So in this model that we chose to use for therapy, the clinicians are really coaching the parents to deliver therapy. So we did a whole training, like a multi-step training for all the clinicians who came into this study. We also ran an introductory webinar for the clinicians to learn about the protocol. Again, they had a program manual and we had a resource website. So all of these strategies were created before we launched the study. And we also realized we needed dedicated clinical time. So a big issue that all the clinicians flagged was that, I don't have time to run these intensive therapies. This is an appointment a week. How do I do this? So we went to their leadership and said, hey, they need this time. How do we get there? And we ended up arriving on this model. So OTs had 1 appointment a month and therapy assistants had 3 appointments a month. This is through our conversations of what was needed to support that. Something unexpected that came up through making these strategies was that everyone thought it was really important to have photos and videos of real kids. So our first draft of all of those things was to have stock photos of young kids. And then we realized we needed to have real kids. So kids in the trial were all offered photo shoots with their family. We asked for a few photos of them doing therapy that we then started to embed in all of our work. So the surprises that come along the way are really valuable too. It's just my point there. So what happened with the study? How did the strategies work? Well, we also added a strategy of communicating our results through a newsletter. So this is from one of our newsletters, the final one we sent, I believe, where we shared our results. So we enrolled 20 kids and 18 completed the study. 2 withdrew, but not because of the study protocol. It was for family-related reasons. So we actually kept 18 kids in the study for about 4 or 5 months of therapy, a long time. We also shared the results with the families and others. So we showed that the kids' goal performance, so how they moved on goals their parents had set and how happy they were with the goal movement, significantly improved. And then satisfaction, which I think we'll come up more in the next webinar, which is a piece of our implementation evaluation. We had really high scores for the clinicians and for the parents. The only low one was the clinicians found the 18-week program to be long, but the parents seemed okay with it. So our strategies from what we take from this, were effective. People stayed in the program, they liked it, and the kids improved on goals that mattered to them. What really matters to me from this is a sustainability piece. So this therapy continues to be delivered at both of the sites we ran this trial at. So during the trial, our focus was, how can we make this sustainable? So there were tweaks made, it's modified, it's not the exact same protocol, but it's very close. It means that families can still access this. We keep all of our educational materials are available on our website, and have photos of those kids who were in the trial. And I always like just sharing one good quote, but we're really, really impressed by how this went. So that's my final example. Key takeaway messages are always wonderful for webinars. So going back to strategies, again, it's the stuff we do to try to help people or places do the intervention, practice, innovation. We use these strategies to address barriers and leverage facilitators. So they need to match your context. And those ERIC strategies may be helpful to look at options that you could use for your implementation study. I think that is all I had to share. So I'm happy to do questions. And I've just linked here our website and then the Instagram where we keep all of our work to date. If there are any questions, you're welcome to come off mute or add it to the chat. Pierre.
Hey, Alicia. Thank you so much for sharing and walking us through that. A question I had for you, when your team was sort of deliberating which strategies to use, and I can appreciate, going from 70 plus to, 21 is quite an arduous task. So I'm just wondering, was there any particular challenges that your team experienced when you were trying to come up with which strategies you would implement in the work you were doing?
Mm-hmm. So we initially all were quite daunted by the number of possibilities. And we had this really lengthy discussion about who is we? Because we kept saying, what are we going to create? And that became this real focus for, okay, these are all great ideas, but who is we and how are we going to do it? And it took a lot. We ended up having an extra team meeting, which, there's 15 of us, so there's a tricky to coordinate, an extra team meeting just to discuss this ponder of we. I think understanding who is implementing and who you're targeting was a key piece for us narrowing it down, that I didn't expect also. Christina, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I was wondering if you could sort of expand a little bit more on the types of patient engagement that you use building this intervention, the therapy, and the program, and what was the key takeaway for you?
Okay, I'll do both studies because they're both just there's so many things there's a couple that stand out, but for Interplace, that pre-implementation study where we narrowed down to 11 strategies, I love this. So number one, the parents were the ones who, when we first designed this study, said it can't just end with creating a list. It has to have a next step of actually creating the strategies. So that completely changed what we were doing and made us really focus on the knowledge mobilization and creating strategies, which I am forever grateful to them for. It couldn't just be knowledge generation, it had to be something. And then they were so engaged in the interview. So they were interviewees. They were able to kind of interpret the research language questions and the strategy questions to be more understandable for our participants in the study, which I think helped us narrow down and refine what we were thinking about doing much more effectively than had it been just researchers interviewing the whole time. For the Heighten study, they also informed the strategies almost entirely. So we thought that just giving parents a little handout about hand therapy would be enough. And the parents all shared that when they were tossed into that, they had no idea. They were new parents often. These are often new parents. You've got this baby that needs to be kept alive, which is hard enough on its own, and then you have to do therapy with it. And they didn't know if their baby liked what they were doing, and like, how do they what if the baby isn't having a good time? How do I get over that? And do I actually have to do this? And so the parents flagged how important it was to explain to parents why this therapy was needed and how to play with their baby and how to keep their baby engaged. And so our materials really shifted from this like protocol based, 30 minutes a day, play with your baby, to this is how you engage them, and this is the cues that you need to know about. And I don't think the trial would have been successful without that, because all the parents who were in the trial shared that those pieces of information were the most important to them. So I would say our patient engagement, our parent engagement is phenomenal. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Celia.
Hey, I'm curious on your use of the ERIC tool and how you found that. Was it or with the matching, how you found that? Was it useful? Was it able to help you narrow it down, or did you kind of end up going back and forth on some other pieces?
Okay, so I liked it. I would say we ran Heighten first. I should these in backwards order, but for Heighten, we really went through all this in discussion because it was a small group. So we didn't, and it wasn't so broad. It was like, in these two settings, what do we need? So narrow focus. For this national project of interplay, it helps so much to lean on expert recommendations for strategies, just to know, okay, the ones I've pulled are evidence-based, and I didn't have to go through a million papers to find them. So I appreciated that. But I did find that the list was daunting, and looking at them, some of them just like, they just weren't applicable to us. So it was a starting point, and I appreciated that as a starting point. Yeah.
And oh, how did you find the language with it? Like, were you able to adapt it to the needs that you had? Because I think it's been criticized for some of the lack of clarity, but just using that as a starting point to then convert it to your own language that makes sense for your team. How was that kind of process?
So what was helpful with how we did it was that we all took the ERIC list as our starting point, and we knew there was going to be subsequent phases to make it our own, to shape it really. So the broadness of it was okay for our purposes, but it was something I flagged earlier that it doesn't give you enough. When I will admit, when I first read them, I was like, well, how do I do this? This is just a description of something there's many ways you could distribute educational materials. It doesn't tell you really what to do. It just says you should distribute. So pros and cons of the flexibility is where I stood. I liked that I could tailor it. I also was frustrated by not having a clear direction.
Just got another question. I'm just curious on the where the studies are now. Like, what's the next step? You said one of them had been wrapping up, but what's happened since then?
So the one that wrapped up, it is still, so that the intervention one, the last one I presented, it's still running as a clinical program at both the sites. So we continue to work with them. We've modified our materials to be what they can do without research support. So they're no longer using the outcomes that we were using because they're quite time intensive, and we research funding to administer those. They've tailored back on outcomes. And for some of the programs, they've modified how long the program actually is, which was something that we had flagged as being useful for some families. Like, we had an 18-week program, that's incredibly long. Maybe it's too long for some. For Interplay, so our phase 2 child bride project, I'm just skimming back to this. So where we sit is that we have yet to create these strategies. Our team is meeting again in September. So every few months we meet to look at kind of the next slot of them and decide how can we work on those. So our work on the first 4 are underway, established or complete. It's now just chipping away. We don't expect to finish them all by next March when we need to be done, but we're trying to see how much we can get through each of these, and then hopefully have all these available, or as many available as possible, for other sites to use. And for them to study them, because we aren't studying them, so we don't know if they're effective. So that's the other flag I have to add here, is that these are ideas that could work. We don't know. Perhaps I'll put up, I know Pierre sent me these, the reminder for next session. If there are more questions, happy to answer them, but I feel like it's a quiet crowd, so.
Thank you, Alicia. Yeah, so just a quick heads up. So if you have not registered yet and are interested in the next session, where we will be introducing a sustainability planning tool for research, yeah, feel free to sign up. I have the link in the chat. And I've also provided a feedback survey for today's session, where we're happy to invite some of your thoughts on how it went, how the content went, and just as importantly, asking your feedback on any potential topics you'd want to see explored in future sessions. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for joining. I want to thank you, Alicia, for walking us through that and introducing us to Eric. And I'm hoping it can be a resourceful that you can at least use as a starting point in the implementation science work there that you all are doing or gearing up to do. Yeah.
I just wanted to add my thanks as well, and to also promote the upcoming session. If you did register before, we did change the date to accommodate the speakers. So there's a new date and time. It's just one day different. But to say that we will be talking about the sustainability planning tool, but the project that is being discussed is about ChildBright itself. So the interviews that were done across the network about what ChildBright members were interested in. So it's the mix of, or the project for this one will be thinking about some of the future of the network, which should be quite interesting.
Yeah, and so if you did previously sign up for the older date, we did send out a note, but you know, feel free to reach out and we can certainly get an updated set of information out to you if it didn't make it your way. So again, thank you all for joining. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you at the next session. Bye.